Natasha Hausdorff was saying that there's more resolutions against Israel than all the other countries in the world combined. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. Well, there's an old joke that I repeated recently in my column in The Spectator that the United Nations should have a football team. And somebody said, well, sure, but who would they play? Israel, of course. Yeah, of course. The look at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, an utter asylum outbreak, if ever there was one. I think the Iranian revolutionary government once again recently got put in charge of the Women's Rights Commission.
Shut up! Did that happen?
Yeah, that stuff is always happening. Just the most ghastly, backward, anti-women, anti-minority countries on earth will routinely be put in charge of the sort of future of children project. I kid you not, everyone can look it up. There are just so many absurd examples. It's the norm at the Human Rights Council, and it's the norm at the UN in New York that horrible countries and horrible despotisms show up at the UN and defame Israel. But this is an old story. The famous 1975 UN resolution, Zionism is racism, which flat out wrong. Anti-Zionism, I believe, is a form of racism. But the 1975 Zionism is racism resolution, at which point the late great Democrat Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan gave one of the speeches of his career. What a speech, you know it? He says, I stand before you and the world to say that what happened today is an abomination. And the United States of America will not abide by it and will not, it's a magnificent moment. People can look it up. But that resolution claiming that Zionism, the idea that the Jewish people have a right to a state in their ancestral homeland, that is racist. It was proposed, if I remember rightly, by Idi Amin, the wife eater, among other things, which on a technical copy editing thing is one of the most pleasing things in my life. When I once described him as a wife eater, I had a copy editor say, you must mean B, be beta. I wrote back, alas not. No, there's no B. But Idi Amin, irrespective of that lurid story, one of the most brutal despots of his time, a psychopath of a clear, famous, notorious level. Even people in 1975 knew that. They knew that Idi Amin was a ghoul and a mass murderer. And he proposes the resolution. And do you know who threw the drinks party to celebrate the passing of the resolution? Kurt Waldheim, formerly of the SA. Yeah.
Gosh.
One-time president of Austria.
So we're in a...
So you have an African warlord thug and a former Nazi celebrating the defamation of the Jewish state at the United Nations. For many of us, since then, I find what the United Nations says on some things interesting. I don't doubt that some of its wings do a lot of good. A lot of it is pernicious, evil.
Is there anything we can do about that?
About the UN?
Well, yeah.
The UN is the UN. I've come to the conclusion that, you could get out and set up something similar, but it'll always sort of go in a similar way. And there's a reason for that, as Kirkpatrick and Moynihan and others identified 40 years ago, which is that since most of the countries at the United Nations are not the same as, the democracies, or at least many of them are not, and there will always be a bias against the liberal democracies. You've got 50 of the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, countries that always vote the way they do. Always anti-Israel, always anti-Western, And you have all the totalitarianisms of the world, all the dictatorships. You have Vladimir Putin's dictatorship in Russia. You got the Chinese Communist Party. So I've always thought that although the UN is a useful place to meet, people should not cite its judgments as being as if they were the judgment of God, because they're not. They are judgments by highly flawed, often wicked actors. If you take Hamas's own numbers, which I don't, but if you take Hamas's own numbers of the dead in Gaza, which they say 50,000, they've just diminished that. Of course, that includes their terrorists, but they don't admit that bit. If the highest figure that Hamas puts out for Gaza in the last 18 months of about 50,000 deaths, which is terrible, and I get it, somewhere between, there's certainly been civilian deaths, no doubt about that. It always happens in war. It's terrible. But if you take that highest number that Hamas points out, that's less than an average 6 months in the Syrian civil war. So why the streets of London are not shut down by people objecting to that? Why the 300,000 to 400,000 people killed in Yemen? Why that nothing? Why there are, as you protests today I saw in London outside the Sudanese embassy, but the streets of London and Manchester and Glasgow do not get shut down by people objecting to the actual genocide going on in Sudan. So obviously it's because the Jews are involved. Obviously.